Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to do a really deep, forensic dive into one of the Quran's most profound mysteries, the disjointed letters, or al-huruf al-muqatta'a. We're going to focus specifically on how they show up in the 7th chapter, Surah Al-Araf, and our investigation is going to leave absolutely no scholarly stone unturned.
So everything we're about to talk about, it's all grounded in this one scholarly text, Tafsir Surah Al-Araf, which you see right here. Every single argument, every piece of data, and every theory we're going to discuss is drawn directly from this source. We're going to proceed systematically to make sure every last detail is presented faithfully.
So right at the start of this chapter, you're hit with these letters. Al-Masa, Alif, Lam, Mim, Sad. Now that's not a word you can look up in a dictionary, but it's part of the divine text. So what are they? An abbreviation? Some kind of code? A name of God? We are going to explore this central question that has fascinated scholars for over 1,400 years.
To help us navigate this really complex topic, here's the game plan. First, we'll define the problem itself. Then, we'll look at the core disagreement on how to even approach it. After that, we'll run through a catalog of all the major theories, dive into a really fascinating statistical argument, explore the most mysterious interpretation of all, and then we'll wrap up with the big questions that still remain.
Okay, first things first. We really need to establish the core of the challenge here. What exactly are we dealing with when we see these letters? It's so important to define the enigma before we can even start to think about the solutions.
Now, the scope of this is critical. This is not some isolated one-off thing. It's a recurring feature you find at the start of 29 different chapters. That's nearly a quarter of the entire Quran. And here's the crucial part. They're recited by their individual letter names, Alif, Lam, Mim, Sad, not spoken together like a normal word. That one distinction is the absolute foundation for every single analysis that follows.
Right away, the source text points out this fundamental split among scholars. You see, before you can even ask what does it mean, you first have to decide how we can find meaning in the first place. This creates a huge fork in the road between transmitted knowledge and intellectual reasoning, and it shapes the entire landscape of interpretation.
And this lays out the two main schools of thought perfectly. On one side, you have the path of naql, or transmission. The people who follow this path believe the meaning is a divine secret. For them, the only way we could possibly know is if the Prophet Muhammad or his successors explicitly told us. Any guesswork beyond that is just not appropriate. But on the other side, you have the path of aql, or reason. These scholars argue, hey, God gave us an intellect for a reason. They believe it's just unthinkable that God would put something in his book that had no understandable purpose. So they use linguistics, context, and logic to try and unlock the meaning. Our source also mentions a third group that tries to blend the two. This core philosophical divide is really the source of all the different theories we're about to get into.
So, because of that huge split in approach, a whole spectrum of theories has emerged over the centuries. We're now going to systematically walk through each major interpretation that's presented in our source text. The first major theory is that these letters are basically abbreviations or initials. For Alif, Lam, Mim, Sad, the Aleph might stand for Allah, the Lam for Latif, meaning the subtle one, and the Mim for Majid, the glorious one. In this view, each set of letters would point to divine attributes that are really important to the themes of that particular chapter. It's like a kind of theological shorthand.
Okay, this second interpretation is really powerful. It frames the letters as this incredible rhetorical device. The message was aimed right at the master poets of 7th century Arabia, and it was profound. It's as if to say, look, this divine, miraculous book, it's made from the very same letters, the alifs, lams, and mims, that you use every single day, yet you are completely unable to produce anything even close to it. It's a declaration of the Quran's miraculous nature. On top of that, some scholars see them as a form of divine oath, like God is swearing by the very building blocks of language to emphasize the truth of what's about to be said.
Then you have a much more straightforward theory. Maybe they're just titles. Just like we call Chapter 20 Surah Taha or Chapter 36 Surah Yasin, this view suggests that Alif, Lam, Mim, Sad might have just been the name for the 7th chapter. It's a very functional, practical interpretation, seeing the letters as a simple way to identify and refer to different parts of the Quran.
This statement right here, this is the peak of that revelation-only path we talked about earlier. It's the most cautious and reserved position you can take. It basically says that the meaning of these letters is an intimate secret shared only between God and the Prophet Muhammad. And from this viewpoint, any attempt by us to try and figure it out isn't just a waste of time, it's an act of overstepping our human boundaries, trying to peek into something that's purely divine.
All right, so we've looked at linguistics and theology.
Now we're going to switch gears completely and move into the world of numbers. This is where the analysis takes a fascinating, almost code-breaking turn. Some scholars have actually done detailed statistical analyses of the Quran, and it has led to a pretty remarkable numerical theory. The central idea here is that there's a direct, statistically significant link between the letters that start a chapter and how often those same letters appear within the text of that chapter. The thinking is that these letters act as a sort of thematic key, and their unusual prevalence is a hidden mathematical sign of the text's divine origin. So, as this table from our source shows, the analysis suggests a consistent pattern. You take Surah Qaf, which opens with the letter Qaf. Well, that letter appears way more frequently in that chapter than you'd statistically expect. The same thing happens in Surah Al-Qalam with the letter Nun. And in the chapter we're focusing on, Surah Al-Araf, the analysis shows that all 4 letters, Alif, Lam, Mim, and Sad, are found in unusual abundance. The proponents of this theory say this is a subtle, embedded mathematical miracle.
But in the spirit of a full academic analysis, this theory isn't without its critics. The source text points out a major counterargument. Is it really a valid statistical comparison when you're looking at chapters of vastly different lengths? A super long chapter might just naturally have more of a certain letter than a really short one. Does the analysis really account for all the variables? These are the questions that keep this a really lively debate among scholars. We now arrive at what is arguably the most profound, complex, and esoteric interpretation in our entire source. This is the theory that these letters aren't just symbols or titles, but that they are the literal building blocks of God's greatest name, the Ism al-Azam, a name that, if known, is believed to grant incredible power and insight.
The process that the text describes is incredibly meticulous. First, you take every single disjointed letter from all 29 chapters where they appear. Your Alif Lam Mims, your Hamims, Qaf, Nun, all of them. Then you treat that entire collection as one big data set, and you filter out all the duplicates. So even though Aleph shows up a bunch of times, you only count it once. When you do that, what you're left with is a unique set of exactly 14 letters, precisely half of the 28-letter Arabic alphabet. The hypothesis is that these 14 letters are the raw divine material from which God's greatest name is made.
Okay, so once you have these 14 letters, the next question is, how are they arranged? The source text cites one specific interpretation, and it's careful to note that this comes from a particular school of Islamic thought. This interpretation says that these 14 letters can be rearranged to form the theological statement, Sirat Aliyin Haq Numsikuh, which translates to, the path of Ali is the truth, we hold to it. It's really crucial to present this just as the source does, as one specific interpretation from a specific tradition.
But let's say you don't accept that specific phrase, and you just believe the 14 letters are raw components. Well, what's the final name? This is where the whole argument takes a stunning mathematical turn. The source explains that trying to discover the correct combination from these 14 letters is a task of an almost impossibly astronomical scale for an unguided human mind. The text actually calculates the number of potential combinations from these letters. The figure you arrive at is over 12 quadrillion. Just let that number sink in. The point is profound. Even if you have the divine building blocks, the sheer number of combinations makes the final name completely inaccessible through brute force alone. It's computationally impossible. And that right there is the brilliant conclusion of this theory. The computational impossibility isn't a flaw, it's a feature. That astronomical number of possibilities acts as a divine safeguard, like a cryptographic lock. This ties all the way back to the idea of a divine secret, one that's protected not just by hiding it, but by the mathematical reality of infinity. It ensures that the greatest name can only be known through direct revelation given to God's chosen ones, and that protects it from ever being misused.
So, after taking this journey through all these incredibly intricate theories, from simple titles to complex statistics and esoteric secrets, the source text doesn't just hand us a single easy answer. Instead, it leaves us with a much deeper appreciation for the Quran's complexity and the very real limits of human inquiry when we're faced with the divine.
This leaves us with a final, really thought-provoking question that just perfectly sums up the whole scholarly effort. Are these letters meaningful in and of themselves? Does the letter Aleph have its own reality and meaning, or is their entire purpose just to be a signpost, pointing us towards something else, whether that's God's attributes, His challenge to humanity, or the building blocks of His name?
It's a question that keeps the door for both intellectual study and spiritual reverence wide open.
And so our exhaustive analysis has to conclude right there, with humility before a mystery that invites both our most rigorous intellect and our deepest reverence. As the source text itself concludes, "Praise be to God, the Lord of the worlds." And that serves as a final, fitting reminder of the ultimate source of all knowledge and the limits of our own.